The following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
And Oshkosh, Dan Rylance is with me tonight, and we're also very pleased to have with us for the second time, the first actually since he's been our new city manager and actually started on the job, Mr. Mark Rohloff.
Hey, welcome.
Thanks so much for being here tonight. We want to talk about a lot of different things, the budget, riverfront development, you name it. We got a list of questions a mile long, so we'll just jump right into it. I guess first of all, you know, when you were on the first time, you had been hired, but you hadn't actually started yet. Now you've been on the job for a few months. How's it been going so far?
It's been fun. I've spent a lot of time getting out and meeting people and just hearing about issues that are going on. And it's just now, over the past couple weeks, that things have started to slow down a little bit, and I can actually start doing my job as opposed to just getting out in the community. It's fun to do those things, but
sure,
people expect me to get to work eventually, so it's getting time.
Yeah.
The honeymoon is over.
Yeah.
No, I hope not.
What kinds of things are people in the community saying to you, Mark?
Well, a couple things. One is in terms of development issues and that, a lot of people are confused about, well, why doesn't this happen? Why doesn't that happen? Why can't we just get it done? And so I'm hearing that a lot, and as we get into discussions about riverfront development, if decisions have been made, I'm trying to say what's preventing these things from getting done. And so those are the types of, when I say I'm getting down to work, it's like, what can we do to get this done? Other things, I've talked to a lot of people and heard things about the development process in terms of people, whether it's as simple as getting a permit for a plumbing inspection at your house or a big commercial development. People want to try to make the process a little smoother. And I've been meeting with departments and explaining the perceptions that I've heard from people and how we can get those things done. And a great analogy was used for me. We have a lot of people who are very dedicated at what they do, but they're all swimming in their own lane. And what we need to do is get everybody to realize that we're all working towards the same goal, and we do need to be watching each other so that we tell the public, well, you may be here with me for a plumbing permit, but you need to talk to this person and this person and this person. So we're looking at developing some kind of a checklist and that we can share with people that want to come in, as well as use it ourselves, so that if we notice that somebody is, well, you haven't gotten this permit yet, you really need to get moving on that, as opposed to people coming in and they get a permit and then they say, well, can I start? Well, no, now you need this permit. And people don't really know where the start and stop end of the process is.
Sure.
Everybody's well-meaning, but without putting everybody in the big picture, we're missing that. And that's something that I noticed pretty quickly and have asked the departments to figure a way to get everybody into the room at the same time so that we can give a prospective builder or a homeowner some really succinct information on how they can get this done.
Sure. Well, you know, none of us likes change. We're all very resistant to it. And despite having some very, very dedicated staff members, they're still human beings, and they feel the same reluctance to change, I'm sure. What's their response been?
Well, I think I've been able to use a couple examples, and what seemed to be a routine issue that maybe clogged up something, I said, but if we did it this way and we did it that way, we could get this done. And they go, oh, yeah, it could be done that way. So I think they're recognizing the value. It'll take time because,
sure,
culturally, people have to come around to change. And it's not just, I could come in and say, you will do it this way today, but I'm not getting buy-in. And I'm getting buy-in, and people are understanding the whys of things that I'm hoping to change. And I think I'm getting a pretty good reaction so far.
Sure. Well, sometimes it's good to have another set of eyes, new eyes looking at things, and that's what you bring.
Yeah,
So,
that's it.
one of many things.
Just
so.
to follow up on
Sure,
that,
go
Cheryl.
ahead.
When you do that, are you working only through department heads, or do you go down to people who are individual employees under department heads when you're talking about this?
I've started with department heads, but as we've had subsequent meetings, I've come in and just given an overview to whatever staff members are there. Just last week, I met with some group, and it was inspectors, individual inspectors, as well as the supervisory people, so that they get an understanding. Because the supervisors are the ones who are going to be dealing with the employees on a daily basis, and I want to emphasize to them too, we got to get this done, and they're seeing the value, and if I can sell the value, it'll all come into place. And I think they're recognizing that there's a value to having that orientation, because it's all customer service, but they can see how it can actually make their work more efficient if they're not if they don't have people 5 deep because another department has helped them out.
Right.
Then everybody benefits from it. So it's a little working that we have to do. It's a work in progress. I'm not
Sure.
saying it's all done.
Sure.
Well, this, of course, is the beginning of October. Sometime this month, I'm assuming you'll be taking the budget to the City Council.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be a tough budget, is what we've been hearing from other folks who have been on the show. And I know you're still working on it in kind of piecemealing things together, if you will. But what can you tell us about the budget so far? What kinds of things can we look forward to?
Well, looking forward to is all a relative term, but I think I can frame some of the issues that are going on.
Sure.
Obviously, because the city is, like every community, under levy limits,
Right.
we have only so much that we can raise in additional property taxes for operating purposes. We have a little more leeway in debt service, but in terms of operations, the basics, police, fire, public works, cultural amenities, our 2.39% increase means we're going to get about an extra $635,000 in property taxes next year.
Okay.
That's what the levy limit allows us to get. So you can take that 635 and it evaporates pretty quickly. You take a look at fuel, just fuel alone. In the last 2 years, the last 2 budgets, our fuel budget has gone up $500,000. Now, only a part of that is going to dip into the 635, but still, when you take a look at $500,000 over 2 years, take half of that, and now you're down to, you take that 250 from that, you're still down to like $400,000 that we're left with. And then there's utilities, electrical, gas that have been going up. This is no different than what you're experiencing at home. We're all experiencing it. So those two things, and over the last few years, the big complaint has always been, employee costs, employee benefits, and those are still going on. We're looking at a 7% increase in health insurance next year. It's kind of weird, but that's actually pretty good. But in reality, when you have 2.39% on the revenue side, it's going to catch up with you. So those big issues are still there, and something we're going to have to take a hard look at. It's going to involve services. It's going to involve trying to figure out better ways to do things. It's going to be a challenge.
Well, you mentioned salaries and benefits, and of course, the city lost a few arbitration situations with some of their union contracts, and that, of course, was creating a shortfall too. How far behind the 8 ball are we on those issues?
Well, I don't know the exact number yet. We'll probably have it in the next few days, but when you take a look at the fact that we were budgeting for perhaps like 2.5%, and it came to 2 3/4%. That 1/4%, when you multiply it citywide, can be a number that we have to absorb for last year as well as this year. So you really got to double up on that number, and that's going to catch up with us as well. So those are sort of the macro issues that we're going to have to address. And every department has legitimate needs and legitimate services they want to provide, and I have to strike the balance. I want to encourage people to think big and think what they want to do to provide better services. And then it's like, okay, these are all great ideas, but we can't afford them. So it's a balancing act that we have to perform, and it's a tough one.
One more real quick
no,
thing.
absolutely.
And then I'm going to give my voice a rest,
Okay.
and hopefully not cough in people's ears, but let you take over. You know, we talked about salary and benefits, and before you actually took over the job, Mark, we talked about this a little bit. There are people out there who really, you know, they're hurting, and they're having to step up and pay more for their health insurance costs. Some don't have insurance. Some have very inadequate insurance. And, you know, there are some who are angry about the fact that such a huge percentage of the city workers' benefits are provided by city taxpayers. And, you know, as I said, before you started, we talked about this a little bit. But people, I think, were expecting you to come in, some people, not everyone, some people were expecting you to come in and just sort of, you know, rule with this iron fist that says, okay, by God, you're not going to get these kinds of benefits anymore, and you're going to step up and start paying more for your health insurance. And we all know at this table, and a lot of the viewers know, that that just simply can't be done because of binding arbitration, because of, you know, bargaining in good faith, and all those things that factor into this. But can you say something to that more than what I've just said?
Well, it really goes back to, and I think we did have a little chance to talk about it last time, it's the state mediation arbitration law. You know, the state prides themselves on the fact that they side with the employer 52% of the time. Well, that means 48% of the time the city loses. And I believe that they're just running for that batting 500 or a little over so they can make that claim. The reality is that the things that they should be looking at, and number one is the ability of the city to pay, is really being overlooked. It just is. They
Kind of an
dismiss it.
unfunded mandate in a
It
sense.
is and isn't, because if we do settle, which oftentimes we need to, because the risk that we take of going to arbitration where it's either the union's proposal or the city's proposal, we could lose. And in this past year, we lost on 4 of them. That was pretty sizable. So when we settle, the perception is, well, why did you settle? You just should have held their feet to the fire. Well, this isn't an issue of holding feet to the fire. It's really, it's a cultural thing at the state level, and we've got to address that. The employees, you know, I respect their position that they're trying to get as much as they can, and there's a bargaining process that takes place. But eventually, the state's going to have to step in and say the core problem here, when you have municipalities that have, you know, 80% of their general fund is personnel costs. If we can't control the number one cost, how can we balance the budget when you're putting revenue restraints on us? And it's like, well, you know, cut the fat. Well, that's all well and good, but 80% of our budget is personnel. We got to focus on that.
Has the city at least gone to each of these groups of city employees, especially those who are unionized, and said, look, it's no big secret, the situation that we're in with shared revenue being cut, costs going up, you know, people in the community upset about the little bit, and I say that because that's what some of these folks are saying, the little bit you're paying for your health insurance benefits, you know, please pay more. I mean, that's a very simplistic statement,
Yeah.
but, you know, has someone from the city gone to these folks and asked them to pay more?
Well, I think that happens through the bargaining process, but when you bring it up in the middle of when you bring it up mid-contract, we're not discussing that we have a valid contract. But if we were ever to get to the point where the alternative is we're going to eliminate positions, you know, if they were willing to talk, I'd certainly be open to it. But typically the response is we're not opening up the contract mid-contract. But if we had to do something drastic and it's like, well, we got a choice of so many positions or some concessions, if they'd be willing to open, certainly we'd be happy to talk about that.
Mark, for our viewers, what was the total city budget last year?
Well, the total city budget, the number I think makes the most sense
Okay, give us a number.
is probably about $65 million.
Okay,
What
okay.
that is that's the traditional services that you're aware of, plus the money that we put in to fund other operations that may have some revenue funding to it, but
Okay.
don't necessarily rely on exclusively general fund purposes. But 65 million is probably the number I'm going to consistently use.
Okay, and considering what you've said already, that isn't going to go up largely on 2009.
No, I mean, when
Huh?
you take a look at,
Your 600.
the math really works out well
Yeah.
because you got 65 million, that's 1%, 635,000. And you take a look at the other big revenues, permits and that's down with the economy. Interest earnings are down. That's just a force of nature. If you know what your CDs are earning, you know what we're earning. We're in that ballpark.
Right.
So those are things that we have to challenge. So when we have a 1% increase in revenues overall, can we balance it? We can, but it's going to make some tough decisions.
And then you've already said in Cheryl's question, about 80% of that budget is basically wages and benefits.
I throw that out as a general number, but it's pretty
close.
close.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, another game that is played is we can only get 1 or 2%, so we're going to raise fees. Are we going to raise a lot of fees for the 2009 city budget?
I haven't gotten to that point
Okay.
yet, but I think you always have to look at those things, but then you have to look at how much they're really going to raise. I mean, you're taking a look at some revenue sources that really amount to perhaps 10% of the whole budget. I mean, you can't solve 100% of your budget with 10% of the solution. You have to take a look at all those things. Revenues, I'll always look at. I'll take a look at the comparables for the area. Take a look at if you can identify the beneficiary of a service, really identify that, the beneficiary, then you can charge them a reasonable fee. But at a certain point, we don't want people what I would call go underground. Well, I'll just not go to City Hall. And some of these services are really done to ensure safety. Right. So you don't want to send people underground because then you're creating an unsafe atmosphere. So it's a balancing act that we have to perform on these things. And we just did one on ambulance rates.
Yes,
we got ourselves up to market on those. Yeah. And in some cases we're still lower than some of our surrounding ambulance services, but we're in the ballpark. There were issues about ability to pay. To the degree people are covered by Medicare. Medicare will only give us so much money, and that's it. And then we essentially write off the rest. We don't pursue somebody on Medicare for the balance. We take what Medicare gives us, and that's the end of it.
How about spending pressures, which is the other side of the budget from revenue? The Northwestern had an editorial the other day saying that it was sort of it pitted infrastructure versus quality of life. And then they had in each group. But there's going to be a lot of pressures, aren't there, for new spending? Or not?
I don't know if there's going to be pressures for new spending.
Additional spending on existing things.
Yeah, that's the real tough part. The one thing you have to be careful about is as you're instituting new programs or new facilities, there are going to be costs to run those things. We've got to be cautious about that because we can't exacerbate our problem. Right. I think the editorial in the Northwestern really stemmed from a survey that we've been putting in our utility bills.
Exactly, and that was, go ahead.
Yeah, the utility bills, the responses we're getting, I would expect. When people are saying, what's your number one priority? Basic safety is really that's why we exist initially. But we have committed ourselves to some very wonderful amenities that give Oshkosh the character that it has. And we can't forget about those. I just came from a museum board meeting, and they were concerned about that, and they thought the editorial was great. Well, that's because it's like, don't forget the museum or the library.
Right. Balance it with the police is what they were saying.
We
right?
can't, and nobody's suggesting that we take dollars from police and put it in museums, but we have a museum. We have to do the best job we can for the museum. We have to do the best job we can for police, and you have these competing services, and I have 12 department heads sitting around the table, and we're trying to work in a collegial atmosphere, but yet we're all trying to get the crumb that's on the table. I really respect them for their professionalism because they recognize the struggle we're all in, and we're going to have to make some tough decisions, and I really want that to be done in a collegial atmosphere. There's for example, all of our fuel is in the public works budget. Doesn't matter if it's police, fire, anybody's car, it's all in the public works budget. Well, if we cut the public works budget, we can't cut the fuel in police, fire, down the line. So we do have to work together cooperatively to get this done, and I'm hoping that we'll be doing that.
One more question on budget?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Okay. When you were here last time, the word sewers was not on our lexicon. Since you've been on, it's sewers, sewers, sewers a lot. And so my question is, how serious is the sewer problem, and what, if anything, are you going to do in the 2009 budget to address that?
We're already starting on it. I didn't want to wait. I didn't want to wait for 2009. There's too much going on. You have to take a look at several things. Sewers being sanitary sewers as well as storm sewers.
Okay.
You know, the flooding that occurred in the basements was primarily sewage backing up.
Right.
But during the storm, obviously, stormwater was getting into our sewer system. There's a term that you're going to hear a lot of. It's called I&I. It stands for inflow and infiltration.
Okay.
It's water that gets into our sewer system that causes the system to what they call surcharge, and that's how people's basements got flooded. We need to identify where this water is getting into our system, and we got to stop it from going in. In some cases, it's people who may or may not know that their sump pump is going into their sewer, into their sanitary sewer. You don't want to put what's called clear water into our dirty water system. Some people in the 70s, this was a really popular thing. People thought they were actually doing a good thing by doing it. In reality, it was setting ourselves up for the future. And then we have some other storm sewer systems that over the years, somebody thought it would be a good idea. Well, we'll solve the problem on this street by tapping it into the sanitary sewer and it'll go away like magic. And a lot of communities did that. I was doing some casual reading and came across a similar situation in Des Moines, Iowa. Des Moines and Iowa had a bunch of flooding this year.
Yes, they did.
Same thing. From the 50s to the 70s, they were allowing people to hook up their sump pumps and storm drains into the sanitary sewer system. Well, you're just setting yourself up for a disaster. I don't know the degree we're doing that, so what I'd like to do is get an inflow and infiltration study done, and you do little things like you actually get smoke into the sewer system and see into the sanitary sewer and see if it comes up through any of your storm drains. And then there's a source of infiltration. Simple things like manhole covers. When a street gets flooded and the manhole cover is not secure, water's just pouring in. We've got to take care of those things too. I've asked the Public Works Department to get working on that because we haven't done an I&I study since the early 1980s. So that's something we got to get done. I've done these before. They're very successful, and I think you'll see results once we get the ball rolling.
Would you do that in select areas of the city then?
I think we would start in select areas, but honestly, the entire city should be done because we haven't done anything. And you just never know where these things are going to pop up. I wouldn't assume that any area is immune to this.
All right. On the same subject of sewers, one of the things that Mayor Frank Tower had mentioned at a council meeting about a month and a half ago, something like that, was he was going to have the city get back to some of these folks who, had serious flooding problems. Some of them, consistently, time after time. And the Northwestern soon thereafter had reported that these folks still hadn't heard from anyone in the city. Now, I've been gone for a while out of the country, but while I was gone, did anything more happen? Or are these folks still kind of waiting to hear from the city?
I think council in general was not pleased with how the response was. I think we, as staff, made some assumptions that our insurance company was doing some additional follow-through, and it really was, the answer ultimately would have been the same, but how they handled it led people to believe that somehow they were going to be responded to and the insurance company wasn't. And when we did ask them to do some follow-up, I was not pleased with their answer either. In fact, what happened was on the day that the council ultimately voted to disallow these claims, that was the day these people were getting a call from the insurance company. That's no way to do business. And the insurance company is aware that I'm disappointed, the council's disappointed. People are, it's bad enough that they had to deal with the injury of the damage, but add the insult to the injury by not giving them that call. They simply relied on information that we provided as staff, which which is appropriate. The process and why they rejected these claims was valid, but how they did it was just unacceptable in my opinion.
Councilman Palmieri was really, I think, on top of that issue about just the deficiencies and how they were responding. I think he made a good case before the council.
And there were, and I think they were dealt with on one large scale, and there's probably some appropriateness to that, but you still need to make sure people understand why their claim was being rejected. And I use the example of Des Moines, and Des Moines, I was able to get some information from them, and they gave a history of how this happened and why the city was not liable. The same message, the same end result that we had, but the manner in which they did it was completely different. And when we recognized as staff that wasn't being done, and the council obviously was disappointed in it, it was very difficult for council to do what I still believe was the appropriate thing to reject the claims, but it was very difficult for them because they knew that the residents hadn't been given the appropriate treatment for their claims, and that's disappointing.
Hopefully that'll change.
Well, we have to go out for bids on insurance this year. And customer service, price is important, but customer service is also important, and it just makes us look bad, and we can't tolerate that.
Were any citizens, Mark, looking for or expecting to hear from someone in the city, be it the Public Works Department or some other department? I thought that I had read something in the paper, and maybe I was dreaming. Maybe I misread it, but I thought anyway that someone was supposed to, from the city, was supposed to be getting back to some of these folks.
I would suspect that some people did expect that, and that's something we'll have to take a look at. I mean, it's a good question. I don't have a good answer for that. It's probably something we need to take a look at. We do rely on the insurance company to do most of that work, and I think we had expectations that they were doing those things. And if they weren't, we probably need to be that, to fill that void, even when the insurance company should be doing it. If they're not doing it, somebody's got to fill that void, and obviously that wasn't done.
Okay. One more thing on sewers that I have anyway. We talked about people hooking their sump pumps up to, one type of sewer system as opposed to another. And there was some talk at the council level about, finding a way through the inspections department to really take a look at this. And, short of going into everybody's home with a search warrant, basically, what kind of progress is being made in this regard, and what do you think is the best approach to solving that kind of problem?
Ultimately, we've got to start with education to make people aware of what the problem is. This is how it's a problem. This is why these questions are good, because people watching at home might say, well, I didn't realize, where does my sump pump go? And if they find out, we need to educate them on how they can fix it. There was somebody else, a plumber came in to visit my office. Said, the guy was probably about 80 years old. He said, I've been a plumber for 50 years. Here's what you need to do. And people need to put in a backflow preventer. That's another way that you can prevent the water from surcharging back into your house. So a lot of it's education. On the enforcement side, I think any opportunity we have to be in a home, we need to check on that. But it still needs to be an education process. If I go to your house for anything, meter reading or going in and for assessment purposes, put it on a checklist that we check for that, and train our employees, even if that's not what they're trained in, train them on how to look for a cross-connect, and that's what it's called. And then if it is, it's not an issue of putting the hammer down. It's saying, are you aware of this is a problem? Here's some information, and we'll be coming back to make sure that you've done it, but here are things you can do to get it done. The plumber who talked to me about the backflow preventer said, it's $100 or less to do that. Well, if people realized how cheap it was, that's a pretty effective way to prevent that problem from occurring. And educating them on not cross-connecting, that'd be helpful too.
Sure.
I have just some short things to go through here, Cheryl. One is the Cable TV Advisory Commission. The council voted to end it. My concern is about citizen involvement with programming. How will that take place without a cable TV advisory commission?
Well, I don't believe the Cable TV Advisory Commission was taking a look at programming. There still has to be a public input process.
Okay.
There's just no formal committee to do so.
Okay.
The Cable Committee's role was to take a look at the franchise.
Okay.
Well, now that we don't have a franchise, that was the limitation.
Okay. But that was only recently, Mark. I used to appear before that commission on programming. It was only when this state law started to work its way through the system that they became preoccupied with the franchise. So I think they did have at least an openness and a broader thing before. But you're right. There is no. What are we going to do in the future? I mean, do you think it's a good idea to have some sort of a reconstituted commission that deals with programming?
Well, I think we need public input on that. Whether it's a commission or
Yeah.
something, we do need something because that's what this is all about.
Right.
I think staff is very open to take suggestions. I think we've been pretty open on public access programming. So I think something should be done and something can be done. Do we need a formal committee? I don't know. But as long as we're open to suggestions, I think we're okay. If it were a point where we felt, or the public felt that they weren't getting the programming they were looking for, then we'd have to listen. But I think our media services folks do a pretty good job of encouraging people to do this. That's why you have your show.
But there are so few of them. And in place of them, the amount of coverage dealing with City Hall is almost exclusive. It's almost a public relations channel now for things that happen in city government. And there are very few shows like this. You need volunteers for this, which is different than you guys just walk in and it's ready. But there seems to be the balance that's what I meant about programming, that needs to be balanced better. I think it's really become lopsided.
So you're talking about funding for public access? Is that what you're talking about?
Part, sure, yeah. These people on this show, thank God, come and do volunteer, but and there has to be training and all this. A citizens program, can't use the regular staff that tape all your shows.
Yeah,
and it's much more difficult. That's all.
Well, it's something we could always look at, but obviously you're getting into some of the funding issues, and that's that we have to encourage people. If you want to have a show, call us up and we'll get you the training and get you in there.
But if we have Time Warner, we are paying as consumers for this.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, so like a little bit more back.
We have, one of the things that I've really discovered since we've been here, and I'm not just blowing smoke because it's here. This is what we have here in Oshkosh is unlike most other communities. This is a very special thing we have in terms of our public and government access. Right. We had nothing like this. Whether it was in my previous community or just in general in the Fox City, there's nothing like this. Right. So I think it makes us hungry for more because it's like you see what value and you see what the potential and the possibilities. Right. And I encourage people to keep doing this. So don't stop what you're doing. Just
there's just so few of us.
Yeah, and we just got to encourage more people to get involved in it.
Okay, let's move on to the Leach Amphitheater. Probably your favorite topic you want to get into. Council voted to give the 2009 operating of the Leach Amphitheater to Tom Stefanik and the Parks. And, some criticism. Burke Tower, who I think is one of the more thoughtful, moderate people on finances on the council, thought the $36,000 budget was way too low and unrealistic. The editorial in Northwestern said that the park director who had this for 5 months was light on staffing, short on marketing and business plan, and hopefully you'll only run it for 1 year. How come there were no other options, after knowing that this was someone else was going to have to take it in 2009?
Yeah, I went back over what had taken place. There was a workshop that was done in May, and there were different options that were discussed. Okay. It almost seemed like the default was we're going to take a look at doing it internally. So my impression from what I had seen on the previous work session, as well as some of the documentation, the documents that council received back in May did review different options, but that wasn't discussed a lot. Unfortunately, the lateness of the hour didn't lend itself to a very thorough discussion. There was some criticism of the marketing budget, which there may be some validity to, but what was missed was that if we're going to pursue something with, for example, Apple Jam Productions to do some of the big shows, that marketing would be done by Apple Jam, and so that isn't reflected in those costs. Simply what they would be doing is they would be renting the Leach, and they'd be responsible for marketing, for staffing, for the major costs. So those costs weren't reflected in what was provided in the information provided by the Parks Director. Marketing for the big events is a huge thing. There was $3,000 budgeted for marketing. The idea behind that, I believe, was for community marketing. So if you wanted to have an event at the Leach for your family, a family reunion, it's not something that PMI was doing in the past,
Right.
so people weren't even thinking about that. Things like one of the high school bands, if they wanted to have a concert there, they would be responsible for handling the tickets and things of that nature because it's their event. So we wouldn't be responsible for marketing that, they would be. So the marketing budget was limited, but it was limited to a very narrow area. But I think there were some excellent comments made by the council, and it demonstrated that they want the Leach to be successful, and they've committed themselves, I believe, that they want to make the more accessible to the community, and that was not happening under PMI. So we'll try to do it a little bit. I remember visiting Chicago, I think before the stadium was redone. I don't know how it is now, but you used to be able to go and walk onto Soldier Field in Chicago. It was on Sundays they close it and make it a stadium, but you could literally walk onto the field. And I started to kind of draw a parallel to that, in that the Leach is really meant to be a park, but it's going to serve as an amphitheater for the public when we have some big events. Waterfest is going to do their own marketing. Right. They're going to do their own thing. If we go with Apple Jam or a similar company, they'll be responsible for those costs. But we do have to take a hard look at those costs and make sure that we're not underestimating our costs and overestimating our revenues.
So considering the options, you're confident that the Parks Department can do a pretty good job in
I'm
2000?
hopeful that
You're
Parks
hopeful.
I'm
All
hopeful.
right.
That's a
I'll leave
good
it
word.
at that, yeah.
I have one more short one.
Sure. About the Leach, or?
No, you want to go with the Leach?
Sure,
Continue?
yeah,
Go ahead.
I've just got a couple of things. So will, with Tom Stefani and his department running this then, at least for '09, will local groups be able to use it for a lesser fee than what PMI was charging them?
We're going to develop a user-friendly rate structure.
Okay,
I mean,
very
that's
good.
That's the idea.
That's
You know, if you want to use the whole services of the amphitheater for a big blowout wedding, you're going to pay quite a bit, similar to you'd be paying for any big hall. If you just want to use the gazebo and the preacher and it's, you know, a small family, then it's going to be like renting a room at a smaller facility, and we're going to develop a scale that's friendly to that. The more services you use out of the facility, the higher the rate, and we'll develop that to make it and encourage people to use it. We've got this wonderful facility. If it sits vacant all year, really isn't much of a benefit to the community.
Right. And one other real short thing on the amphitheater, Mark. You know, a few years ago, certainly before you started here, there was talk about anywhere from a 50-cent to perhaps $1 facility charge per ticket. And, you know, that was shot down the couple times that it was brought up. I personally thought it was a good idea. You know, you pay it when you go up to the PAC or any of these other places, and, you know, you don't even really feel it. I mean, you don't even know it's there. It's just sort of built in. With the budget coming forward, will there be any kind of suggestion that a facility charge of some nominal amount be built into tickets, whether it be for Waterfest or some other event?
Well, I wasn't aware of that. That's one strategy that you always employ. I haven't gotten that detailed yet, but obviously if we're looking at something, you may want to take a look at something like that. But remember, the Waterfest, part of that is trying to make that as cost effective as possible. The Apple Jam one, you know, perhaps we can take a look at it for something like that, because that is really a big blowout type of event, and you could perhaps use it for that purpose.
Yeah.
I won't rule it out, I'll put it that way, but I haven't gotten to the point where it's like, okay, should I do that or not do that? But It's a good suggestion.
Yeah, well, because and I think it should be across the board then. I mean, if you're going to do it for Apple Jam, I think it should probably be done for Waterfest too. I mean, their argument when this was brought up one of the times was that they already had, their marketing material and so forth printed. Well, if it comes up at budget time, then they don't have their stuff printed yet, so that argument is out the window. And I really don't believe, no one in this world can convince me that if a 50-cent, even a 25-cent or 50-cent service charge, facility charge, whatever you want to call it, is built into those tickets, people aren't going to, that they're not going to come to Waterfest. They will still be there just like they have been for years and years and years. So just some food for thought. But I don't think any particular group should be targeted and say, well, these guys can pay it, but Waterfest gets a pass. Because, along those same lines, Mark, we've been hearing complaints about EAA getting a pass on certain things for a few years. Whether it be for, what was it? Was it waste removal from the grounds or whatever, and something with the sheriff's department budget too.
Traffic police protection.
Yep, getting a free pass on that, and people were not real happy about that. So, just a suggestion.
Just a little fee.
Yeah. Again, it could be a quarter a ticket, and it would still raise, I think, a little bit of extra money for the city. And let's face it, we can use it, So.
Well, obviously, we have to put the Leach in a position where it's at least covering its basic operating costs. We can't afford it not to do that. So, whatever we can do to make that occur, we're going to look at it. And with us trying to make this more, resident friendly, so people use it. Might be something to look at, but you got to balance those things out.
Important quality of life issue, like some of the others that we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're taping tonight on October 2nd, which is the night of the vice presidential debate, which some people say will be sort of the end of the presidential. My question is about how well is the city set up to conduct this 2008 presidential election, which will take place on November 4th. Do we have enough poll workers, for example? Do we need more?
We can always use poll workers.
Okay.
In fact, I was really impressed. I was walking by the clerk's desk yesterday, and there's a question on voter registration forms. Would you be interested in helping out at the polls? But our staff actually asks the people, would you be interested in helping out at the polls? So if you are available on election day.
This is my third presidential election.
Well, good for you.
Yeah, and I think this will be the most interesting, the most challenging, and probably one of the greatest lessons that I'll have in my life as far as politics are concerned. And there are some problems. Have the city, for example, cross-checked all new voter registration since January of 2006?
They have done everything that they were required to do when that law came into pass. So when people came in, the law was not passed on January 1st, 2006. So, but clerks throughout the state, and I would say throughout the country, are being burdened with these unfunded mandates. And I think they're doing an outstanding job. But I'll tell you what, the state elections board keeps changing the rules.
Tell me.
And it's just amazing. And the number of clerks statewide that are just throwing up their arms and quitting, leaving their communities because they're just frustrated. They just don't want to deal with it anymore.
Sherry, I've worked as a poll worker for 10 years, and that same sentiment by poll workers, it's too much bureaucracy. It's not like it used to be. I don't think I'm going to do another election. That's true of the poll workers as well as the city clerks.
Well, and then you take a look at, certainly, I'm a firm believer in democracy, and I would love to have 100% voter turnout. I mean, if you really want to have it, that's what you should have. But the whole issue of absentee ballots, which I don't necessarily have a problem with, but the bureaucracy to deal with absentee ballots is very difficult to deal with. And
it's going to slow up every precinct place in this city and the country because there are so many of them this year, and we're supposed to feed them through the process during the time that the polls are open. If you get a stack of 300 absentee ballots, you've got to enter them into the poll book, you've got to give them a number, you've got to unfold the ballots. If they're written in pencil, you've got to make a new ballot because the machine doesn't read pencil. We're talking There's no way where there's going to be enough time during the election day to process those absentee ballots.
You can tell this is a big issue for you, Dan.
It is
Yeah.
because
You
it's-
understand it
yeah,
because you're working
yeah.
it.
Help me understand this. Why is it that, is it something with election law, or is it, is there some other reason why, since those absentee ballots are coming into City Hall, why can't the clerk's office, not that we want to put any more work on them, but I mean, they do have a voting machine down here. Is there some reason
You
that
cannot,
they can't?
you can't turn on that machine, and it's
Gotta
like
happen.
it's a sacred
Go ahead.
machine. You
Go ahead.
can't touch it
No.
until election day.
No, I understand that, but I'm saying, you know, why can't they just feed those absentee ballots through that machine
Because you can't turn them on until election day.
on election day?
Yeah.
Why
Well,
can't they turn them on?
But then
Or
you
put 'em
have your
in?
poll books for each area that you have to enter them.
You have to treat the absentee ballot
As-
almost as if the person just walked in.
Precisely.
And then when
Yeah.
you have the lines forming, usually what election workers do is when there's a break,
Right.
well, let's pull out some absentee
Right.
ones and get them going. But when the lines are just nonstop all day, I think in most cases, you guys don't get to them until the polls close.
Well,
and then you're
that's right.
feeding
Yeah.
them in.
Yeah, unless there's a lull, and then we try to. Pam usually delivers them after lunch in most places. But then we've got new voter registration. There'll be some of those. You can in Wisconsin you can register and vote at the same day. Got provisional ballots. This is going to be a long, long, long day.
You know, register. I mean, what we can tell people: register early.
Yes.
Get
Oh,
yourself
good
registered.
point. Yep.
You're standing in two lines
Right.
if you come on election day and,
Yeah.
and decide you want to
Yeah.
get registered to vote.
Yeah.
Get in early.
Right.
If you do want to absentee, you know, if you want to absentee, go for it because
Right.
you want people to vote.
Sure.
Right.
But make sure you fill out the paperwork properly. You don't want to go to all this work and then get rejected or get it dragged out. Get it in so that it's filled out thoroughly. Follow the instructions because when it's time to open the ballot, it helps the election workers get it through quicker. And then you're not waiting for some precinct in Oshkosh, Wisconsin that's going to tip the presidential election. You know, it sounds corny, but
Yeah.
it could be us. It could be, you know, we could be the Florida of 2008. You never know.
If this comes within a percent or two, you know there'll be a recount. Either
Absolutely.
side.
Yeah.
And we don't want to talk about that
Yeah.
because that's another couple weeks of work. I'm done for a while. Go ahead, Cheryl.
All right. At the very beginning, Mark, we talked about, you know, the image, not so much of the city, but people's perceptions about what's going on in the city and things like that. But speaking of image of the city, there was a survey recently that was done, and nearly half of the community's business leaders who took part in that regional survey said that the local government here is subpar. The perceptions prompting new efforts by city officials to look at ways to make Oshkosh more business friendly. 37%, actually, I'm sorry, 45% of those surveyed in Oshkosh said they rate local government as fair or poor, compared to an average of 37%, you know,
Statewide,
throughout
or in the
northeast
region.
Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So I know that this is something that you're looking at working on amongst all your other things that you're having to do. What are you and your staff looking at doing to improve the image that Oshkosh has?
Well, obviously, my main concern for Oshkosh is that while the region was 37%, which reflects a general view of local government, we were at 45. So my big concern is that 8% between 37 and 45, because that says we're separated. We stand out from the rest in a negative fashion. I will point out that if you went through the guts of that survey, when you got to individual services that are provided by the city, very positive remarks. So I think it's somewhat perception, but there might be issues that we talked about earlier in terms of dealing with the development process when somebody wants to expand their business, because these were primarily people in commercial and industrial businesses. So you want to take a look at that because they're the ones who are going to be creating the jobs for the community. I take that very seriously, and that's why I'm proposing some of the things I am to take that perception. And again, it's a perception, but we've got to deal with the perception as if it's reality. And so some of the things I talked about earlier are really the focus areas that I'm on. I want people to understand that they are not just swimming in their own lane. They're really a customer service rep for that person coming to City Hall and eliminate those things. most people don't have interactions with the police department. Most people don't have interactions with the fire or ambulance. That's a very narrow, it's general benefit, but really narrow focus. And if you don't have any interaction with the police department, it's pretty darn positive. But it's when you have those issues where you are dealing with the city, whether it's a parking ticket, and if your perception of the city is based on solely on a parking ticket, we're going to have a negative. And that's why the 37%, all cities have to work on that general issue. But when you're talking about a specific area, particularly development and being business friendly, we need to do what we can to assist people in being successful at their business. There are health and safety rules you have to follow, but after that basic need is met, we need to help them do whatever they can to help their business or themselves succeed.
Okay. Let's talk about development.
We got to get to that.
Riverfront development. You want to go?
Well, why don't you bring us an update on
Sure.
where we're at? I think for people watching, I think that would be just
Sure.
concisely give
Now,
us an update.
I already did another show on the public access, but
I watched part of that.
You guys won't be as soft on me as John was. Huh? Let me just briefly talk
You
about
had
it.
maps and charts too.
That's right. That's okay. But the basic issue is that we've had a large discussion at the at the council and RDA redevelopment authority for several years now on this riverfront development. And one of the things you asked me earlier about impressions of Oshkosh, most people I talk to say, well, why aren't we just getting this thing done?
We're saying that.
And so, good. Well, and those are the people, I mean, that is more than anything, I've heard that issue. So when you take that, what can we do to get it done? Has the public embraced the basic concept of the development down there? A multi-use development with some multifamily housing, hotel, offices, restaurant, and retail. That basic concept, I've heard a little bit of complaint, but quite honestly, not a heck of a lot. So why aren't we getting it done? Well, the economy is a big issue. The banks are, as we all know, they're tightening credit, and what a developer used to be able to get financing for this project with 10, 15% of their money into it, now the banks are requiring 35, 40%. So that requires more of an investment on their part. So that's tightening things up. But there are still people interested. Obviously, we have two groups that have indicated some interest. So I want people to understand that, number one, the city has already invested $6.3 million in that area. What did we spend it on? Well, we had to purchase the properties, we had to clear the sites, we have some money set aside for environmental remediation, and then the second part of it, we're probably looking at another $3.8 million to do the river walk, the seawall, which will fortify the riverfront so it can get developed. So when we're all said and done, we have $10.1 million that we'll have in this thing. In order to make that turn around from a financial standpoint, we need about $33 million in development to make that happen. We've already borrowed the 6.3. We're already paying back that loan. The only way we're going to get revenue to pay that loan back is to get development going. So I guess my belief is that the public, through the RDA and the city council, has already said this is what we want. And there are people out there that disagree with that, and I respect that, but my direction from a policy standpoint from the council and the RDA is this is what we want. The two developers have come in and they're willing to do something there that is pretty close, and our agreement with the access group is that that may be assigned to somebody else. Two people have come forward indicating an interest in it. I think it's appropriate for the public to take a look at it and say, is this what we're looking at? Essentially, they're the same, but there's some differences there, and I think people are going to have their own opinion based on what they see with the two proposals. I'd encourage them to come to the October 8th meeting. It's going to be at the Senior Center, North Annex, at open house at 6 o'clock. Give an hour of time for everybody to take a look at all this stuff, understand these issues, take a look at the two basic models as well as the original model, and do a little comparison about what these are. And then at 7 o'clock, do a brief presentation, and then, because it's going to be broadcast on Channel 10, and then get some input and hear what people have to say. But overwhelmingly, people are telling me, get this project done. And I know there was a lot of talk about extending the public input process. I think the public's aware of it. I want to get people there and, good, bad, or otherwise, get their input so we can move on with this project.
Is the office building still in all these plans?
Yes, I'm neglected to say that. The office building has been modified
Okay.
in both cases. Both developers are proposing something comparable. Two 25,000 square foot office buildings. They've taken out the atrium that was, while it was very nice looking, was adding costs that was going to have to get turned in higher rents. And in order for this to turn, you're going to need something a little more market friendly. And it'll still be a beautiful building that will help oversee, but we'll do it so that you can fill up one building, and then once that's rented up, then you can take a look at how the market's going to absorb that second building. So you don't overbuild, but you get the building started, and getting the building started is really important.
And we should probably make the point too, Mark, that the talk is that these two parties would kind of work in concert with each other. It wouldn't just be all or nothing of one of them. It would be kind of a part and parcel sort of thing, correct?
There are some conflicts with some of the proposals they have. We've asked them if they would be willing to talk, and I think they are having some discussions. I don't know if it will necessarily work out because both of them have interest in the office building. So somebody's going to do it, somebody's not, or they have to figure out a way to do that. But they do have some conflicting proposals for what I call the middle area on either side of Marion Road. The north side, one proposal is to maintain the original plan, all retail. The other plan has the hotel on that side. On the south side of Marion, it's just the opposite. There's retail, and the other one has a hotel. So I'd encourage people to look at those things and give us their input. And we also have to take a look at which one we believe will be the most financially successful.
Sure. Real quickly, we're running out of time here. You recently took part in Leadership Oshkosh. What did you take away from that experience?
Well, the issue I brought up earlier about why aren't these things getting done, there are a lot of people in this program, most of them a lot less gray hair than mine, that are just now getting involved in the community, and they have a lot of questions. That question is, why aren't we getting this done? Why can't we get this done? That's a big issue. So that's a group that as I took those comments, that's coming back. Also, perceptions about things that we need to do. The issue you raised earlier about, making it more efficient at City Hall in terms of processing applications. And then just things, let's make this community profile in a very positive fashion. And that's not just the city's responsibility, that's everybody's responsibility.
Sure.
So a lot of optimism, and it
right.
was good energy.
Very good. And also, just very quickly, very smart move, I think, to appoint John Fitzpatrick as your assistant city manager.
Yeah, he's just adding another hat. He's still got all the other duties. I'm not adding a new position. John's just been such a great resource for me, and I want to keep using him.
All right, terrific. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
we'll have
Mark.
you on again soon.
Hey.
Great.
That's going to do it for us. We'll see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.